Welcome to this evening's presentation of Maximum India. I'm Alicia Adams. I'm the Vice President of International Programming, and it is my department that's responsible for producing this festival and others here at the Kennedy Center. I think we have a very special panel this evening that will talk about the portrayal of women in film. And we came about this when we were traveling and doing a lot of research for Maximum India and trying to sort out who other curators would be, what the content of the festival would be. One person's name kept popping up in terms of film, and that was Nandita Das. And ultimately, and we had an opportunity to meet with her and talk to her and get her ideas about what she thought we might focus on in terms of film. And her idea was to look at the portrayal of women in film. And while that may not sound like a novel idea, it is an interesting idea when you consider the backgrounds, the history, the work of many of the women in film in India. So we're very proud to have Nandita as the curator for this presentation. As you know, she needs no introduction. She's an acclaimed actor in films like Fire, Earth, Before the Rains, Mandi. She has starred in over 30 films. And what is also interesting about her is that she has generally picked films and worked in films that she believed in. So she has real belief in the work that she does. In 2008, she also directed her own film called Farak, and that also won a major award. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Nandita Das and her panel to come and to take the stage.
Hi, Neil. And the panel.
You come here.
Good evening, everybody. Looks like there's a lot of excitement, and we are going to talk lots of serious stuff. So I have to admit, this is the first time I'm moderating. I'm usually sitting somewhere there. And it's so much easier to answer questions than to ask questions to all these eminent people. But this is a great opportunity. I've been fortunate that I've known all of them in different capacities, worked with these two, that's been an honor, and have been waiting for him to cast me, so that's an aside. So I first want to just tell you a little bit about how this came up. Alicia gave the Kennedy Center perspective, and I'm going to tell you how I got into it. When Alicia and Gilda came and they talked about, what kind of film series we would want, and we talked about women's portrayal in Indian cinema. And I thought that would be quite appropriate because, as we all know, that in many ways, films are a reflection of the times and the context of the society. And that's why often when we see old films or films of another country, we get to know so much about the milieu, the culture, the thoughts, the ideas, even though they may not be the overt intent of the director. And more so, I think, when we talk of women, when we talk of portrayal of women, I think that is also very reflective and telling of the times that the film is set in, and also of what people are thinking, how women are treated, what are their journeys, what are their trials and tribulations. So I thought this was going to be a very interesting exercise. It was my first time that I was putting some films together. But little did I know that 5 films out of thousands and thousands of films was not going to be, was going to be so difficult. Because one had to take films across decades, genre, directors, actors, thematic things, issues, portrayals, regions, languages. So it truly was a mammoth task. I've tried, of course it's a subjective opinion. I'm sure if different people chose their 5 films, they would be different. But I do hope that all of you will be able to see all or at least some of these films. And I'm sure you'll draw your own conclusions as to why we decided to show these films. I have a very, very Eminent Panel. I'll begin with Mr. Adur Gopalakrishnan. I'm going to read out his short resume. The long one's really long. Mr. Adur Gopalakrishnan is one of the most eminent filmmakers in India who has uncompromisingly made films that he believes in. He's also written and produced most of his films. He has made 11 feature films and about 30 short films and documentaries. His first film, Swayamvaram, pioneered the new wave cinema movement in Kerala. It's a state in the south of India. He has won National Film Award 15 times, Kerala State Award 17 times, and has also won several international awards. He received the Padma Shri in 1984 and the Padma Vibhushan in 2006. These are prestigious civil awards that are given by the President of India. The nation honored him for his valuable contribution to Indian cinema by awarding him the highest cinema award of India, the Dada Saheb Phalke Award for the year 2004. He's respected as one of the few Indian filmmakers in the international film fraternity. So, welcome. And he's going to be presenting Nalla Pennugal, which is a Malayalam film, and which the English title is For Women. To be honest, I didn't want actually that particular film only because I have also done a small role in it. And you might say, oh, out of the 5 films, you've already got yourself in. But it was a film that was difficult to ignore, especially with the subject. Also because it talks about, there are 4 different women, 4 short stories, and you'll see it tomorrow evening. I think it'd be best if I just introduce all of them at one go and then we start the question. I could see with the loud claps that, of course, everybody knows Ms. Shabana Azmi. But yes, once again, I've had the good fortune of working with her twice in films and once in a play. She's an actor of international repute, as we know, and has done 120 films and several plays. An alumna of the Film and Television Institute of India of Pune, she made her film debut in 1974 with Shyam Benegal's Ankur and won her first national award for her stellar performance. She soon became one of the leading actors of parallel cinema, an Indian new wave movement known for its serious content and neorealism. Regarded as one of the finest actors in India, Ms. Azmi's performances in films in a variety of genres have earned her praises and awards, which include a record of 5 national awards for Best Actress and several international honors. She's also acted in several international projects. But in addition to acting, she's also a human rights activist and has been a member of the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of the Indian Parliament. She is going to be also presenting Fire and Mandi. Unfortunately, both the directors couldn't be with us. Mandi's director, Mr. Shyam Benegal, who was going to come, but his daughter met with an accident, and unfortunately, he had to cancel his trip. And Fire, Deepa Mehta, the director, she's filming at the moment, so therefore she couldn't come. So she's going to be presenting both. And in Fire, again, I'm going to be with her. And again, an apology, but couldn't be ignored. We have Mr. Ketan Mehta. Yes. Again, a very eminent filmmaker. He's also directed documentaries and television series. He's made 10 feature films, 7 documentaries, and 2 television series. His repertoire of themes include comedy, satire, romance, violence, and revolution. His films have also traveled to various film festivals where they have won numerous awards over the years. Mirch Masala is one of his films that we are showing on Sunday, is one of the first crossover films which released in cinemas all over the US. His latest film, Colors of Passion, is based on the life of the great Indian painter, Raja Ravi Verma. Satyajit Ray's film, Devi, which is also being screened at the festival, was going to be presented by Ms. Sharmila Tagore, who's going to be there for the screening and for the Q&A, but unfortunately she couldn't come in time for the panel discussion, so we requested Mr. Dilip Basu, who has done a lot of work on Satyajit Ray's films. He's the founding director of the Satyajit Ray Film and Study Center and helped create the South Asian Study Center of UC Santa Cruz. He's currently the professor of history and film, and he has written a book on Satyajit Ray's Devi. He's been working on restoring 22 of his films at the Academy of Motion Pictures. And he was instrumental in helping us to get the print of Devi, so thank you for that as well. So this is the Eminent Panel. This is a very eminent panel, and directors, actors, people who've been doing academic work on films. So it's not going to be too difficult to ask the questions, because I think they all have gone through several decades of work and have seen the roles of women changing in society and in cinema. So I would ask the first question to Mr. Adul Gopalakrishnan, and seeing your work, I myself have seen your work for many years. Somebody here, while I was coming up, was commenting that how come there are no new films? And I said, well, 2007, it's a new film. So why do people think that, even though it's a new film, of course, you are covering the period of 1940 to 1960 in the film. So the question would be that after doing several films, why did you feel the need to deal with women's issues, to take up these 4 women stories in a time that was, in a way, what we call period, and not sort of take up the contemporary women?
Well, these 4 stories are written by a very outstanding writer in my language, Malayalam, Thagadi Shivashankara Pillai. And these stories were written in the 30s and the 40s. And when I went through these stories, the ones I liked most were these 4 stories on women. And they were written at different times, but I found some connection in these 4 stories. I did not want to combine them and have a common characters going through these 4 stories, but instead they have been kept individually separate. But what was important was the issues talked about in these films. Each of them is relevant even today. That I found very interesting, because that means there is a certain timelessness about these stories about these women. It covers a period of, through these 4 stories, it covers a period of something like 20-25 years. And it talks about women at different levels of living. And then slowly through these stories you find this, their discovery of their self, in these stories. And finally, the character that you play in the last story, she belongs to this middle class with some education. So she is able to resolve on her own. That growth in these characters, that is what is being portrayed. So, of all the films I have made, I think this has been the most popular film in terms of festival participation. It has been already shown in Washington. It has been shown in several festivals in the UK, USA, all over Europe, and also in the East. So when I made the film, I thought, as you asked, this story is happening in between 40s and the 60s,
Yeah.
and it's happening in a remote village in Kerala. How would it communicate with an audience outside the country? These questions were in my mind. But then, what is being said in the film? It's absolutely universal. This is what I discovered.
Universal,
this
yes.
is what I discovered from the responses.
So at some level, are you saying that things haven't really changed that much for women? That something that was relevant in 40s and 60s is in a way, sadly or strangely, still relevant today?
No, I am not saying that nothing has changed. It has not changed enough.
Definitely. Well, some of these questions are rhetorics, and
Yes.
because I have seen the film many times, having worked with it, but I think it's important to share some of these thoughts, because
Before an audience that has seen the film, it is easier to explain.
absolutely.
Now that this audience is probably most of them have not
Not
seen the film.
Well, tomorrow it's at 7:30, and we hope
Maybe-
to see all of you.
Maybe after the screening of the film, we can discuss
Yes,
it.
there is a Q&A after the film.
Yes.
Now to Shabana Azmi. You have done films from 1974 till now and 120 films crossing genres with a whole range of filmmakers from very mainstream to very experimental to middle of the road, all kinds of labels. Also, you have done so much work on women's issues, so your insight about society and cinema and the influences both ways would be really insightful. So can you tell us that do you really see any kind of a graph in all these years having done so many different films?
Yeah, most certainly. If you look at the trajectory of portrayal of women, particularly in mainstream Hindi cinema, then you will see that mythology seems to play a very dominant role in our societies as not something that was treated in the past, but something that influences our aspirations and ideals of who the ideal hero or the ideal heroine is. Oftentimes, filmmakers, instead of accepting the reality and the changing face of women today, tend to go back into accepting women from mythology. So Sita, as the quietly acquiescing wife, is looked upon as the ideal, or Ram is looked upon as the ideal. Now, in that process, particularly in mainstream Hindi cinema, although there were a couple of films in which women were in very prominent roles, largely we saw that women, even though they played central roles, they were within the stereotype of the woman as the suffering mother, the sacrificing wife, the understanding sister, and all of that. In fact, it's interesting to let you know that in the 1960s, there was a film that starred a very well-known actress, Meena Kumari, and it was called Main Chup Rahungi. I will remain silent. Remaining silent was a virtue in those days. That mercifully changed. And then you started seeing much later, like 20 years later, if you look at the 80s, I'm talking again in mainstream cinema, you suddenly had a reversal where women were now cast as avenging angels. And so I always say that first we had Rambos and then we had Rambolinas, but nothing that in any way was anything more than a cardboard character. It was really left to parallel cinema, and Adur and Ketan are fine examples of that, to bring any kind of complexity to what it actually means to be a woman, has largely been left to the parallel cinema. I've been very fortunate because I've been in both kinds of cinema, and for me as an actor, all the challenging roles have come from the other cinema. But I think in today's day and time, finally, the film industry has realized that the woman as she was understood in the past, in her stereotypical image, is no longer acceptable even in mainstream cinema. Personally, I had an extremely interesting experience because there was a film called Arth, which means meaning, in 1984. And when I did that film, it was a very simple story. Has anybody seen Arth here? Okay, there are lots of people here. Okay, so you know the story. Anyway, for the people who haven't, it's about a wife who's abandoned by her husband for another woman. She begs him to come back, but he doesn't. When the woman finally starts finding her own identity, the husband comes back to her and says, "Sorry, I made a mistake. Will you take me back?" And so she looks him squarely in the eye and she says, "If I had made the same mistake and if I wanted you to come back, would you?" And he's honest enough to say no. So she walks out on him. Now, what was very interesting is when the film was made and it was shown to the distributors, they all thought it was a wonderful film, but they saw the end has to change. An Indian woman saying no to her husband, the film will not run a day. Anyway, fortunately, Mahesh Bhatt, the director, and I dug our heels in and said, no, this is the reason we want to make the film. And of course, the film became what became really a cult film. And it proved the detractors wrong because it became a huge success commercially. So oftentimes, audiences are much more ready than filmmakers are willing to give them credit for. And Arth was definitely that kind of film. But I'll just take a little more time to tell you that for me it was personally an extremely challenging thing, because suddenly I had women walk into my house not as fans to star but in sisterhood, expecting me to resolve all their marital conflicts. And I was,
Should I be walking out?
I was really, and you know, great hostility from men. You're teaching women to walk out of the house.
Absolutely.
Is this the answer, etc. But what it did, I was only an actor, and I was very frightened by what was happening. But what it did is made me realize that the actor really has a role to play beyond that
Well,
of
we
just
have
inhabiting
experienced that in
the
Fire. You know
character.
what people have accused us for. So.
Let me tell you, Nandita and I and Deepa Mehta were in London, and we stood to speak, and the first question that was asked, are you lesbians? So we said, no, we do a very good job of it.
Absolutely. But I do want to ask a follow-up question is that, you know, when you did these parallel cinema roles which were more challenging, more real, more attuned and resonated with your own understanding, and then when you did the mainstream films where maybe it wasn't all that you believed in, was that switching over easy, or how did you deal with?
You know, I really didn't have any set notions, and I was going with the flow, and oftentimes, I mean, how much reality can you bring into a situation where Shabana Azmi and Neetu Singh are hanging from a well in which crocodiles are waiting to eat their feet up as villains and heroes are fighting
And
for
you
one
know
man.
they're never going to get them in any case.
How sincere can I possibly look? So you have to do it. You have to do it with panache, and you have to enjoy it, because for an actor, it's in a sense, and you realize that it's far more challenging to look at situations which are really quite out of the ordinary and to bring any degree of credibility and an element of fun. Because I think for an actor, it's very important to be able to open up and say, all right, this is also, if you look at it as a genre and say, that's what so in that sense, it's been challenging.
Great. Well, there'll be many more questions, I'm sure. Now to Ketan, you. You've done 10 films, and usually with filmmakers, you can kind of see that, oh, this is a so-and-so film. There is a kind of a stamp. But you have done very different kinds of films, taken up very different themes, and that's why I mentioned that in your introduction as well. Your last one is about a painter. You did Mangal Pandey, which was completely different. Bhavni Bhavai, which one can never forget, your first Gujarati film. Mirch Masala, Maya Mem Sahab, Hero Hira Lal Holi, etc. So it's a huge subjects. You've tackled different subjects, and the treatment has been different. So how have women in those films, because your sensitive portrayal of women and their journeys has kind of remained in all of them. How do you see the women's portrayal in your films and in general in Indian cinema?
I mean, as broad a question that can come your way.
Well,
Just to put this question in context.
absolutely.
When Indian cinema started way back in 1911, for many years, there were just no women in films.
Yes.
Even the female roles were being played by males, you know, for decades. And that's how the role of women in Indian cinema began.
By men.
Okay. Yeah. I think we can actually divide up the story of women's role in Indian cinema in pre-independence and post-independence kind of a division. In pre-independence times, by the time talkies started, there were two iconic images that stay in my mind. One is a great actress called Devika Rani.
Of course.
Truly bohemian at heart woman who broke all the rules in the world and still was an iconic figure. On the other hand, there was this Austrian woman who came to India and became Hunterwali, you know, a woman with a whip and, as she said, Rambolina kind of a person, a female Tarzan. Once the independence came in, somehow, because of maybe the participation of women in public life through the Gandhian movement that really galvanized the womanhood in India, in a sense, the transformation had already begun. Two iconic figures, films and characters that come to mind in the post-independence first decade, that's 1950s. One was a film called Mother India, played by Nargis, a woman who was resilient, who is strong, who is defiant, and who is pure. Yeah. On the other hand, the other extreme was a film called Mughal-e-Azam, a courtesan who takes on the emperor and challenges the powers that be. And somewhere between this dialectic of Mother India and Anarkali is the entire spectrum of Indian womanhood as portrayed in that generation. We in India, on one hand, pray to goddesses. I mean, every occasion, whether it is a birth or a death. There is Saraswati for knowledge and education. There is Lakshmi for wealth and prosperity. And there is Kali or Durga for destruction, the symbol of power. On the other hand, there is domestic violence on a daily basis. Women are burned on a daily basis and molested on a daily basis. Now that is the dialectic of our nation even today. And then we come actually to the next generation where Shabana and Nandita really represent the new post-independence womanhood. Her film Ankur really is, in a sense, the beginning of the new Indian woman who is self-assured, who is questioning, and who is reinventing herself. And so it's really an honor to be with both of them here today because they really represent the new Indian woman in all its glory. And actually, I mean, the subject is so right because if you just look at the representation of women in Indian cinema, through that you can actually see the changes that are taking place in the society as a whole. From now talking about just my films, which is again 80s and 90s, the film that has been selected here called Mirch Masala took it one step beyond Ankur to a defiant woman. A small village, a beautiful village woman, a feudal lord comes to the village and demands that he needs this woman. And it actually just polarizes the entire society. The problem here is that the woman, for the first time, says no. And that is unheard of. How can a woman say no to the powers that be? And the entire village just gets divided between whether she should be sacrificed for the general good of the village, or does she have a right to say no? And to me, that is the beginning of real woman's empowerment, the right to say no. From there, now you actually go through real dramatic changes happening in the Indian society. In 90s, I made a film called Maya Memsa, which was an adaptation of Madame Bovary, where for the first time, one question, whether just like a man, does a woman have desires which are different? Does she necessarily have to be satisfied with what she gets? Does she have a choice? And as an completely Indian adaptation of Madame Bovary, it was a fascinating journey for me to get into a woman's mind, to try and be a woman, and to think like a woman, to try and get into her dreams.
And spread bad, wicked ideas.
Well. Speak for yourself, Shabana. Yeah. And so, gradually, as the society changes, and as the filmmakers change, and as she says, filmmakers usually end up following the audience, the portrayal of women has dramatically changed. To an extent that a very recent film, just released a few weeks ago in India, is called Saat Khoon Maaf. Yeah? 7 Murders Are Forgiven. A story of a woman who goes about systematically killing her 7 husbands. No, that's extreme. So we have come a long way from the time.
But as he himself said,
I can hear a lot of approval for that in the audience. That's no good.
we're going to have problems after this panel, I suppose. But as he said that, in India you have Devis, the goddesses, and yet there is abuse on the street. So these contradictions exist. So if there are 7 murderers, it doesn't reflect maybe too much. Maybe it still means that, there are other things happening. So India is a land of paradoxes and contradictions and variety and diversity and whole lot of things. So, and in fact, that's why to choose 5 films that would in some way represent not the whole gamut of portrayal of women, but give you a sense of what are the journeys of different women in terms of region, in terms of class, in terms of their relationships vis-a-vis society, vis-a-vis women with each other, like in Mirch Masala and Mandi. So as you said about goddess, that brings us to the film Devi, Satyajit Ray's Devi. I'm sure you all know of this great filmmaker. And Mr. Dilip Basu, who's a professor and who's helped in restoring many of his films, has written a book on Devi. He's also done a lot of work on portrayal of women in Satyajit Ray's films. So the question would be to you, in particular, how do you see the women that Satyajit Ray has portrayed in his films, and also his relationship with his actors, because he was very, very sensitive to the kind of casting he did and the women he chose for his films.
Well, thank you, Nandita. I'm greatly honored to be here on this panel. I've known these wonderful people. They are really, each one of them is a very wonderful human being, other than being great actors or directors. Recently I read, 3 days ago actually, I read an international survey report which said that is the greatest violence committed against Indian women by Indian men in the whole world. 80% of Indian men surveyed admitted they committed violence at one point or other against their wives. This is an astonishing fact. I really find it hard to believe, because in my personal life, that has not been my experience. I never saw my father being violent with my mother. As a matter of fact, my father hardly spoke to my mother. And when he wanted to address her, he'll call her Rani's ma, well, his eldest daughter's mother. Will not call her by a name. I am not like the other panelists. They are actively involved in filmmaking or as actors. I'm on the sidelines. And my great commitment was to save the legacy of Satyajit Ray, whom I knew personally very well. And I saw how he suffered in the 1980s and still tried to make films, which his doctors would not allow him to make. So when he passed away, I was asked by no less a person than Audrey Hepburn to undertake this project. So I told her, I don't know anything about film restoration. I know quite a lot about Satyajit Ray and his films, but how can I do it? She said, if you don't do it, nobody else will. So I went to Library of Congress Film and Visual Collection Department. I went to UCLA Film Archive. I went to Berkeley Pacific Film Archive. They all said, we greatly admire Mr. Rai, but this is a project we cannot undertake. Anyway, one of the things that fascinated me about Rai is a review that I read after Home and the World, Ghare Baire, was released. Pauline Kael, the famous American film critic, who always trashed all filmmakers, famous filmmakers, but never said a bad word against Rai. She was a great admirer of Rai's films. After seeing Home and the World, she wrote in New Yorker, it's hard to believe Satyajit Ray is a man. How can a man can feel, can probe, and portray in a film the feelings that a woman goes through? I think that was a great compliment. And I had asked Rai, you know, people have said, critics have said, in your films, women are so strong and men are weak. Why is it so? Do you really feel that men are weak and women are strong? She said, no, not exactly that way, but in my experience, in my family, and the women I have known, I always found them to be very strong and very determined in the way they do things. Without really violating family ethos, ideals, or their personal roles, they were really very strong. And that's what I represent in the films.
Would you like to say a little bit about Devi in particular? Because you've
Yes.
written a book and we are showing the film.
Yes, so let me come to Devi. That's the film that Rai made in 1960. It's based on a short story published in 1899 by a short story and a writer and a novelist named Prabhat Mukherjee, was a very popular writer. But the story was given to Prabhat Mukherjee by Rabindranath Tagore. He heard that story as real, as true, about a 16-year-old bride being declared by her father-in-law as the incarnation of the goddess, and how she really died after being installed in the family temple as a live goddess. Actually committed suicide. Now, the first line of the story says, this happened really in life 100 years ago. And the story was published in 1899. It also says, this story was given to me by Rabindranath Tagore. Now, 1799, the British East India Company had conquered Bengal and set up their shop. Western education had not begun. So Rai fast-forwarded the story to 1870s, because that was the period when there was a great debate over women's question in India, especially in Bengal, about women's education, about women's emancipation, about widow remarriage, etc. So he put in this historical debate in the film as a father-son generational debate. It really is a very, very powerful thing.
Dilip, we don't want to reveal too much because they're going to watch the
I
film.
know.
And you've already told them the end, so I have to protect now
sorry,
the film.
sorry.
But it is a very powerful film. And
Very powerful
again, one
film.
of those timeless films.
Absolutely a timeless film. And Sharmila Tagore will be here,
She'll
coming
be
here.
to present the film and for the Q&A as well.
For Q&A. She was cast in the film. That was her second film. And she said that, you know, I didn't do anything in Apur Sansar. Rai told me to do this, do that, look that way, speak this word and that word. I just followed him. And when he asked me to play this role, I was really afraid how I am going to do it. But then I got into it. I really felt that I became that role and acted that way. And truly, I must say that the way she is presented in the film, she does look like the goddess.
Absolutely.
And that's what Pauline Kael also said. Rai had this ability to really find the real women and their feelings.
Absolutely.
And I would say that in the rest of Indian cinema, women are decorative objects. Only recently, women's sexuality has emerged in a very powerful way, and actresses like you are doing that. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well,
You know, I have a problem with women being treated as Devis because I think it's a subversive thing to do, to say that we are not going to give you equal rights. That's difficult. So we'll call you a Devi. We don't want to
We
be
don't want to
treated
be
like
Devis.
goddesses.
Absolutely.
We really want equal rights. And I think that's what we are trying to say through our films.
but in many ways, I think Satyajit Ray's Devi also says that she just wants to be a 16-year-old bride. She just wants to be a human being. She wants to be a wife. She wants to be a mother, an aunt, you know.
Father-in-law really greatly loved the daughter-in-law.
Okay, now again, you're telling the story and I'm going to...
But
Luckily, the
it's-
moderator has... my eyes are on the watch, Dilip Da.
No, it becomes the tension and the fight
No, absolutely.
between the father and son.
I think it's also a very unique panel because while they all know each other and have worked, may not have worked. We all work? No. I don't think anybody's really worked with each other. But that's why more so, I think, because being contemporaries, having seen each other's work, admiring each other's work, is there any question that you would like to ask each other?
Why haven't you cast me in your movies?
Imagine what a loss, yes. Okay, now you both have to speak the truth and nothing but the truth. No politically correct statements here.
No, I had given you an answer long ago because one of your great powers is your voice. Once your voice is dubbed by somebody else in another language,
It's a cop-out.
yes,
It's a cop-out, Atul. Cop-out, not good enough reason.
Because the next question would be that is my voice so bad that you took me and dubbed it with someone else?
Good.
no.
So we are going to have wars here as well, not just in the audiences. But I think it's always nice to have such a wonderful audience, and not to give you enough time to ask questions would be terrible. So I think it's best that we throw it open to all of you to give your comments, ask questions. But please raise your hands and please do say that whom do you want to ask it. Am I going to just
Mic.
see it or somebody moderating that? Okay, there's a mic coming in from there. Sorry, you'll have to wait. Okay, the gentleman here, please.
There is a one lady was
Yeah.
at the fourth row. You see, she's putting up her hand. You
Right.
cannot see because of this light.
Yeah, the line. Yeah,
Yeah.
Maya.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. My question is to the whole panel. I was wondering, one of my favorite directors was Satyajit Ray. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
And I was wondering if he influenced any of you
with such a
in
big
your
way
careers or
influence any of
inspired
you
you in some
or
way?
inspire any of you?
Yes, he has been an inspiration for all of us,
Absolutely.
not just one person.
Yes.
In fact, our whole new generation of filmmakers have been influenced by Ray. We don't copy him because we find him, because that won't be in praise of the man's genius. We have taken inspiration from him. The way he portrayed reality. In fact, this film, Devi, is a strong statement about the woman. You know, I am not giving out the plot. The old man, the father-in-law, he really almost falls in love with this beautiful girl. And she cannot, this is a forbidden relationship. So he would rather imagine her as a goddess. And she probably understands at a very subtle level. There is no overt
Yeah,
scene
it's very
of,
layered and
yeah.
a lot of subtext.
I should add that some of you may have seen Devi.
Not yet.
I'm sure.
Some, very few, so we...
I'm sure there are people here.
No, I'm sure
Washington is a very sophisticated town. So there are people. Haven't you seen Devi? Anybody here?
No, actually,
No, not... Well, I'm sure few have, but we want to save it
the
for the
print
larger
that you
audience.
see is a restored print. It's not the worn out old print.
Right.
So it's an amazing film to
Yeah.
watch.
I think the lady there was raising her hand, Maya. There.
her hand.
Oh, you've got the mic.
She has the
Okay,
mic.
great.
She has-
Is this on? Yes.
Yes, it's on.
Hi, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask the whole panel of your opinion of the portrayal of Indian women in non-Indian films, say in American or British, Western
Okay, that's
European
interesting.
films.
You say Indian woman in non-Indian films. What is the portrayal? What do we think about how the Indian woman has been portrayed in...
Indian women in non-Indian Indian films? Sir?
You mean Slumdog Millionaire and other films like that? Or?
Oh, the very, one of the most...
Yeah, not the only one, but I mean films. Like,
Slumdog Millionaire is one of the most popular films made in recent times about characters in India. I think it's a complete misrepresentation of life in India. Complete misrepresentation.
Bad film.
I think it's a very bad film. Very. It satisfies and endorses what West thinks about India.
stereotypes.
The plot revolves around her and the pursuit of her in a way. Could you continue what you're saying and tell us more, maybe specifically about her role as an Indian woman in the film? In Slumdog, or and in general, I think a lot of us are curious
Actually,
in general.
it is not fair to discuss it because it's not worth discussing.
Okay, you got the answer. Shivana, would you like to, because you've also worked in many international films and you have also been part of those projects. Have you had-
Actually, the first international film I did was a film called Madam Sousatzka, in which I worked with Shirley MacLaine. It was directed by John Schlesinger, and it was an extremely interesting part. It was somebody who was living in London, and her husband had died, and rather than go back to India, she decides to stay on, and she has ambitions for her son, who she wants to turn into a pianist. It's a very feisty, very strong woman. I enjoyed playing her very much. Then after that, I did a film called City of Joy with Patrick Swayze, directed by Roland Joffe. And although I played the wife of a slum dweller, I was also a slum dweller in it, she was a woman of great strength. She had the ability when there was this Western doctor who had come in and wanted to get the slum dwellers together. They are all suspicious of him. And she's the only one who says, you know, I think we should throw in our lot with him. So although she was seen as a traditional person, she was seen as somebody with autonomy. and somebody who could take decisions, and it was important. So I thought that in the couple of films, then I've done a film called Immaculate Conception. Anyway, it's not about what I've done, but I have seen that there's certainly more complexity than it is within mainstream Hindi cinema. That's not very difficult to achieve, to give women more complexity than mainstream Hindi cinema does.
Mainstream is not complex at all. It's very simple. That's what she mean. Huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question for all the panelists. What are your comments on Bandit Queen? That in many ways, it's such an iconic movie.
Bandit Queen.
I loved it. I thought it was an extremely powerful, very, very moving film, and very sensitively handled by Shekhar Kapoor and brilliantly enacted by Seema Goswami. I really liked the film very much.
I'm assuming I'm also a panelist. Okay, once in a while I can also, I guess, chip in. Because I completely agree with Shabana, what she said about Bandit Queen. It's a very powerful film. I remember when it came out, there were also screenings where people were throwing coins. And they said, oh, is it titillating to see? There was one scene where there was a certain amount of nudity, but it was so contextual. And I mean, all the women they were churning inside, and you were full of anger, discomfort, sadness, helplessness, and all of that. So I think sometimes the audience reaction, when you see an audience reaction where people are throwing coins and whistling or clapping at a wrong time, it reflects more on the people than the film. And in that sense, I think it was very sad that there were some audience reactions like that, and by no means it's a reflection of the film and the power of the film.
Just to add to it,
Sure.
Bandit Queen was actually a British production. I really wonder if Shekhar had an Indian producer, would he have been able to make that film as he actually managed to make it?
Sure.
In India, we have a really bad practice called censorship. Where there is a censor board which censors all the films. I wonder whether Bandit Queen would have even passed the censor board if it was an Indian production. Fortunately, I mean, that is also changing along with the society and everything. But yes, Bandit Queen was one of the landmark films of the 90s, in a sense, which really overwhelmingly changed the perception about Indian womanhood.
But talking of censorship, for instance, Fire was actually surprisingly passed without a single cut. Then there are also, custodians of culture who take it upon themselves to censor it. That is, small groups of people who think they have the moral high ground to say which films should be watched and which films shouldn't be watched. And both Shabana and I think, suffered it in Fire and also in Water, because we were the original cast of Water and we couldn't be in the film primarily because we were attacked during the film, not even the opportunity of watching the film and giving your opinion. So I think more democratic and civil ways of dissent is something that I think all societies have to practice much more. So yes, censorship is an important aspect in that. Should we take another question?
I was curious about what the panel thinks about the portrayal of women in mainstream Hindi cinema in the 80s and 90s. That is the kind of cinema I grew up watching, and
Poor you.
actually in Pakistan. But and I was really interested to know what your perspective is about the Madonna Ho complex, which is portrayed by heroines like Madhuri Dixit, Sri Devi. For example, one of the movies that come to mind is Tehzab, where Madhuri Dixit is a very strong dancer. She's a very strong woman who has a strong public presence. But at the same time, when she's with her lover, she plays a very feeble, almost weak portrayal of a woman. And of course, I'm seeing it in my own personal, very subjective understanding, but I wanted to get your perspective of what you think women were portrayed like in the 80s and 90s. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question, because particularly the 80s and much more the 90s actually, was a period when it reached an all-time low I really think. Because women, like I just said, you know, there was this Insaf ki Devi, Zakhmi Aurat, wounded woman, so and so tigress, I will not let him live, I will not let him die. All that kind of thing in this false kind of bravado of this is what the empowered woman is, where there's no understanding of what empowerment actually means. And also this cop-out, where you go ahead and show an empowered woman as somebody who's rude and speaks badly, and then it's the taming of the shrew. You know, by the end, she's all demurely in a sari, and she's sort of been corrected by society. Because I think what was happening, particularly in the 90s, was that cinema had started realizing that we needed a new woman, but they hadn't quite figured who this new woman should be. So a certain degree of independence was given to her, but not enough to shake the power equation. And so it was like, in psychological terms, what was a pseudo-power was given to her, and it was almost inevitably a cop-out in the end. There was all this confusion. Also, celebration of sexuality, which is a welcome thing, and it should happen. There was a lot of confusion about that. Because when women celebrate their sexuality, it's a wonderful thing. But when it's done under the male gaze, then there is a problem. When you see choli ke piche kya hai, what's behind the blouse, it's not really the woman celebrating her body, because she's being watched at that moment by the male who's got one eye patched up. And you see, cinema is about images. And when you see images, when you see a heaving bosom and a swinging navel and a swiveling hip, the woman loses all autonomy over it. So she gets commodified. And when the woman is commodified, we cannot say that that is empowerment. So there's been a lot of confusion. It's wonderful that, for example, I remember some feminist friends of mine saying, oh, I don't know what you have problems with. I think there was a song with Govinda and Karishma Kapoor called Sarkai De Khatiya Jada Lage. And I said, I just find all those movements really vulgar and all. And she said, no. Karishma seems to be enjoying herself as much as Govinda, so she's not a passive recipient of his love. She's also an active participant. I would love that to be true, but I disagree. But I think that all that confusion is now getting sorted, and now much more you are seeing at least women who are working. Otherwise, if you look at Hindi cinema, you would believe that they wear yellow saris and swing and sing in the Alps. That's all that women do. The reality of India is that women work, whether it's in rural India, where 80% of the population lives, or in urban India, women work, but they're completely invisible in Hindi cinema. It is only now, if you look at the last 10 years, that you can see a definite change that is happening. And also what is very interesting is that roles are being made available for older women. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, definitely, a woman turned 30 and that was the end of her career. But you have seen, as a result of the women's movement all over the world, somewhere a trickle down, where roles are now becoming available for older women as well in pivotal roles. So it's a very, very happy transformation that is taking place.
Can I add something to it?
Absolutely.
Just to add something to what Shabana just said. What happened in the 70s and 80s, till about then, there was a heroine, and then there was a cabaret dancer. You know, that was the kind of a dichotomy in terms of
the vamp and the
characterization of a woman. Gradually, with consumerism really coming in 80s and 90s, these two actually merged together. The heroine was also the cabaret dancer.
Yes.
You know?
That's true.
But earlier there was this, like you said, there was a very clear distinction. And because of our own history of colonization, if you looked at who the vamp was, she was always
Blonde
the Western
and
person with
light-eyed.
blonde hair. And, you know, you could safely lust after her without ruining your own Indian woman. So she had to be Burmese or she had to be Western, but she couldn't be. The demure wife was always
But
clad in
sometimes
Indian
the
clothes.
heroine could be the vamp if it was a dream sequence, or she was playing up, you know, she was pretending to be someone else, then she could have a little more fun.
Yeah.
So it is rather complex. I'm sure for those who haven't seen all these films, like, they must be thinking, what are these Indian films all about?
For an Indian culture where sensuality was celebrated for centuries, over the last 1,000 years, somewhere a major transformation happened from the erotic sculptures of...
Metaphorically speaking. No, someone said 1,000 years.
Yeah, what happened is that somewhere the parda and the Protestant culture of the British rule really curbed down the entire sensual aspect of interaction between man and woman, and it didn't allow it to come out in the open at all. It was only after independence that these kind of forces have gathered some momentum. We don't have to blame everything on the British, do we? No, I mean, that's why. I mean, I said somewhere, if you see the Victorian culture, it was as regressive as some of the aspects of Indian culture that we are criticizing here.
Actually,
I think he wants to say something as well.
I want to be fair to the commercial Hindi film, because it was not only the women who did not have anything to do, the men also didn't have anything to do. They had all the time just for romancing, nothing else.
First of all, I would like to welcome you all to DC. It is a wonderful panel. My question is, like every other movie has an item number. What kind of portrayal of women in an item number, you know, for an international audience who don't understand Indian women, what kind of portrayal of Indian women is that? Could you please answer that? And as women activists, you know, what you guys are doing about it. Thank
I
you
have
very
no
much.
problems. I have no problems with item numbers at all. I have problems with women falling at men's feet. That's what I would oppose. If she's doing an item number and she's got a good-looking figure, fine. She's happy to display it.
That's the profession.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. My question is, I was wondering if any of you could share your thoughts or experiences on how these films that we've been talking about this evening and other films in the parallel industry have actually impacted real women in just everyday women that you would see, and how much you would attribute it to these films and not, you know, education or financial independence. And the reason I'm asking is because in my limited knowledge, the people that are watching these parallel industry films are typically more educated and have more perspective than those that are watching the mainstream industry films.
Shivana, would you like to?
I think that is a problem. That when you preach to the already converted, then you're only reaching out to a very small section of the audience. And that's why it's a welcome sign that even within mainstream cinema, you see that there is an emerging woman who is different. If you see a very mainstream film called Band Baja Barat, which has just been released, you see an independent working woman who can take things right on her chin. And that, for change to be brought, it has to happen in mainstream cinema. Having said that, I must say that cinema cannot really bring about instant transformation. If you go and watch a film on Gandhi, you don't start behaving like Gandhi from tomorrow. But what all art can do is create a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur. I think that's what art can actually do.
I would also like to add to that, somewhere when we grew up, or I grew up, cinema was the most powerful medium ever invented. We believed that cinema had the power to change the world. We believed that the cinema had the power to change perceptions of the people. Some of us made films in order to participate in that process of change. Fortunately, some of the films that were made during that period also reached out not just to the educated elite or the upper middle class, urban middle class, but even percolated down through the NGOs and other film societies and things like that. And somewhere films have definitely, certainly in case of India, contributed to changing perceptions of the society as a whole?
If I can also just add, I don't think that the educated class or often the middle class where the cinemas are there, people do watch films, that we have sorted it all in our minds. I think we think that it's only the uneducated who need to understand, who need to change, and we have sorted all our contradictions, our dilemmas, all of that. I think there is much work that we all need to do within ourselves as well. So if films are a mirror to us, I think there is a lot of work that we need to do, because many of us, we come from a class which is the decision-making class, which has a greater voice than the man on the street or the disadvantaged people. So I think if these films reach us, I would be less cynical about it. I would say, of course, we want to reach out to more and more people, but if this is it, then so be it.
Hi, good evening. My question is, we have talked about the portrayal of women on the screen, but I wanted to specifically ask a question about the correlation between the women behind the screen, especially the ones who sing for Miss Azmi, Miss Das. Do you think there was a particular idea in the minds of movie makers to give the sacrificial, demurring kind of songs to a Lata Mangeshkar and a cabaret vampish song to an Asha Bhosle? Specifically, Miss Azmi, would you say that Tujhse Naraz Nahi Zindagi in Masoom was sung by Lata because it was a woman who was sacrificing? And to Mr. Mehta, again, would you say Khud Se Baatein Karte Rehna in Maya Mem Saab was given to Lata specifically because, again, they were the demure, sacrificing kind of women who portrayed that voice throughout the decades?
I think it's an extremely interesting question, and it is something, in fact, Asha Bhosle's daughter, Varsha Bhosle, has specifically spoken about this in an article where she says it works in insidious ways. And Lata was, not only just for the quality of her voice, but because of her image, given the more devotional songs. And Asha Bhosle, because she broke rules in society, because she divorced her husband, because she got married to a younger man, was cast in that mold. So there are insidious ways that this works as well. Whether people do it consciously or not, insidiously it does work like that, yes.
That's right.
Just to give you the context for those who don't know, these are two great playback singers who are sisters. So Lata Mangeshkar, the one who sings more demure, sacrificing good songs, is the elder sister, and Asha Bhosle, who's also a wonderful singer, who sings for Vamps and Helens of the world.
In fact, there was a film called SARS in which I acted, where there were two sisters who were competing for a career which was a first of its kind, because otherwise you saw women in Hindi cinema competing for the affections of a man, not for their ambition. And in that sense, it was quite groundbreaking. Also the fact that she got involved with a much younger man who her daughter is also attracted to. So at several levels, SARS, which was made by a woman director, was a path-breaking film. It didn't do very well, unfortunately, but it did try those things. But let me go back to a question that was asked, is women behind the scenes. What I find intriguing is that not so much in cinema, but in television, a lot of the serials are being written and directed by women. And yet, you don't see images of the new woman. You see them in the stereotypical roles because this is what they believe society wants. Yes. And that I find curious because I feel just the fact that it is women who are now writing this, they should do it with the consciousness of being women and work towards creating more positive images of women. But for that, they need to be informed about the women's agenda, I guess.
No, also I think because...
no, I think they are...
I think economics also rules
they are
so
actually
much.
informed by the commercial agenda of saying, of believing that there is a certain kind of ideology or ideas which sell, the others are too courageous or too bold to sell.
So even if they know, I don't think they're able to make that leap. And I think women are also part of patriarchy. I don't think it's such a man-woman divide as well. I mean, as we know that women also are conditioned in a certain way to follow patriarchal rules. more questions, please.
Hi. First of all, thank you, panelists, for coming to Washington, D.C. I used to watch Meet the Portal, Shabana Azmi, Anita Das, and Nasruddin Shah. My question is, what change would you like to see in Indian cinemas today? This question especially to Ms. Shabana Azmi and Nandita Das.
I think it really should be answered by Adur and by Ketan because they are the filmmakers and I think they are the ones who are looking for that change. We are only actors.
But you as an actor, what is the kind of change that you would want?
Well, you know what I would want really is that the variety of films that are available to the audience, that needs to expand. I don't believe that only the kind of films that I like and I believe in are the only films that should be made, because that's not democratic. You should be able to give a wide variety of films of several genres, of several kinds, so that the audience has the right to choose. I have no problems with certain films being made for entertainment alone, because entertainment is a wonderful goal. But I think we need to redefine entertainment. So if within the mainstream, if we can have, at the moment we have great technical ability, great technical skill, but somewhere the script, which is the mainstay of the film, needs much, much more work. So I would like more new writers to come on the scene and to do truly more complex work in terms of characterization than is now available in that space.
Well, I would say that in the independent space, because there are a lot of directors who are wanting to make different films. India is so rich in literature that it's impossible that we don't have great stories. It's just that there aren't enough people to back such projects. And while mainstream cinema everywhere in the world has the bigger share of the cake, I just wish there would be a little more space for independent voices, for different stories to come out to the audiences. And so therefore more audiences would demand such films and more filmmakers would make it. But finally, economics unfortunately interferes with art so much that I wish there was a way to make films with less money, or I don't know, democratize the whole process so that these stories could actually find their way into theaters and audiences.
Is it on?
Yeah?
Okay. I just wanted to say, Shabana, I really appreciate what you said about women's sexuality. I thought you hit the nail on the head when you talked about commodifying women in movies. My question is about, specifically, I know one of the pervasive values of women is to be viewed as fair-skinned. And as far as what I've seen in film, when you look at actors and actresses, they all tend to be very fair. And when I look at...
Fair. That's why I'm not in the mainstream. I can answer that, by the way.
Yeah, you answer it.
I also would like you to kind of speak to, what that says about class differences, and that's really something when I look at people, my friends and family, they don't tend to be of the, skin that's portrayed in movies in the mainstream.
First, I can't hear, and secondly, I don't know where you are.
Well, about fairness, I can tell you that, yes, there are a lot of compulsions. In fact, if you're dark, then you can do all these rural women and, these lower class women, and because they all are dark and it's fine. I did one film, and I won't name it, where I was supposed to be a middle class woman. And the director very hesitatingly came to me because he knew that I didn't want to put makeup. I've been very overt in saying that, this whole battle of fairness creams, I've never used one. It's like a personal little battle, and you're trying to fight for the cause because 80%, 90% of Indian women are this color, and please stop making us feel guilty for it. So this director came up to me and said, power to dark women. Right? So this director came to me and said, could you put a little more makeup and just make it a little lighter, because she's a middle class woman. And I said, well, so am I in real life. So are we trying to make a real film? So it is definitely, but it is influenced by ads, it's influenced by what the society also wants to see. After all, film is a reflection of what happens in society. It's not in isolation. So I guess whether you see matrimonial ads, whether you see the bursars in an airline, whether you give interviews in corporate houses, fairness definitely helps. But we'll continue fighting.
If it is of some comfort, it is really not only about darkness and fairness. It is an idea about beauty. It's an idea about how the Hindi film heroine needs to look. Her hair, her makeup, her eyes, her figure, everything falls into a box that they have fitted for her. And consequently, we have all heroines looking identical to the others. And anybody who doesn't fit in is somebody who has a problem getting in, which I find very strange, because in a country like India, how can you have this one figure? If you look at somebody from Kashmir and if you look at somebody from Tamil Nadu, there's absolutely no one standard of beauty. And interestingly, what mainstream cinema does is tries to whitewash all the details and create an alternative reality. There is an alternative, which is this North Indian Punjabi idea of who is. Because there's a lot of worry about, and so that's why you have a lot of Miss Neetas. They don't have a surname, because if she's a Thakral or if she's a Thakur or if she's a Mehta, then she'd be located in Gujarat or she'd be located. And if she's located in Gujarat, would somebody in Tamil Nadu be interested in her? That's the kind of psychology that works within mainstream cinema. And art cinema does just the opposite. Art cinema locates a story in a specific area and region, and that's why it becomes much closer. So there is that inherent contradiction that goes between regionalism in India and this alternative reality that exists.
Or homogenizing and making it sort of pan-India, because there is no one India. So when there is a desire to make it sound Indian, this is an Indian woman, but who defines and who says that, Aishwarya Rai or whoever the prototype of the ultimate beauty, and everybody else has to be that. But like you said, that the eyes on the hips and the hair, everything has to be sort of similar, but I still think it begins with being fair. Once you're fair, then we can deal with the rest of it. I've gone through it, trust me.
And again, we can also blame it on the Brits.
Colonization. 200 years of colonization.
Mahinder wants to ask a question.
That is not fair. That is unfair.
Funny.
Yes, ma'am. Who has the...
Mahinder here in the second row.
There.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment, and just to say that it's wonderful to have you people here. It's very interesting. But just a comment that what the producer made it about the Slumdog Millionaire. Let me tell you how we saw as a Slumdog Millionaire. I've been here for 35 years. There was so much positive image of India that that's what it showed, not the poverty, not the bad part or thing, but they saw it as a poor person living in a slumdog. His mind was so open. He used the opportunity. And look at how the Hindu-Muslim, which we make the facades all over, but we don't, in the class system, we don't have there where it is, and how they lived happily and helped each other. Of course, we do have poverty, and the cinema cannot always tell you the positive things. A part of it was this, which they showed, and how independent mind and how opportunities, how he became from the poor and uneducated to win the prize. That's what we see here in India as. A lot of people go and travel India all over. They say, we know that India is a little poor and poverty, but what we see in India, the independent minds, the poor people come and ask you, where are you from? Where are you wearing these clothes from? Are you from America? Are you from this? This is that independent minds of the young people and the poor people. That's where India has reached where it has reached. And that's what they liked and admired it. Right. That is what the Slumdog showed it. And that's, another thing is, I think we Indians, I also part of Indian, sometimes when we don't agree with the foreigners, how they see it, we, criticize at this, but we don't see their angle.
There is a certain arrogance in this attitude, and there is a certain lack of understanding in this attitude. And somewhere that is what pervades this particular film.
Also, Also, you should know that this film did not do well in India. It was rejected by the audiences. It was rejected because they found so much falsehood in it. Gandhi did very well. Gandhi did very well. I can tell you. Gandhi was a huge success. Gandhi was a huge success. He did very well.
I think in arts,
because it was co-produced by.
Okay, I'm going to be a hard moderator and just say that art is subjective, and each one I think will take different things from it, and that's the beauty of art. There is no right or wrong. I don't think it's about you're more right or I'm more right. You have your view and I have my view, and let there be space for that. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions with lots of hands. Yes. Please, can we have short questions and short answers? Why do we, sorry? Okay, why don't we take 2-3 questions, because there are lots of questions, and then we can answer together, because maybe there are some questions that might overlap. Yeah? Sorry.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm a first-generation Indian, born and bred in the States, and grew up with parents whose connection to India was often film. And we watched it at home, and that's actually practically how I learned Hindi. And it's refreshing and wonderful to see a panel whose goal seems to be social change and progress. And it's wonderful. Do you, though, feel that you're in the minority still, or do you feel that there are many people like you who want to see social change through film, through television, and other types of media as well?
It is obvious that we are in a minority. Very obvious. Otherwise, the whole thing would have been different.
Okay. So one of the beautiful aspects of India is its diversity. And my question was about there is not just one set of women's issues in India, because depending on the culture that the woman is from, depending on the languages that the woman speaks, there are different issues that the woman faces. Sure. There are people who are affected by ecological issues, and women especially. So my question is, are there initiatives in Indian cinema which are targeting non-mainstream people, especially women, for example, tribal women, representing their issues in their own languages? Because, and I say mainstream as in the languages of all the states. That to me is mainstream. So are there initiatives where we're trying to raise awareness about women in minority regions or tribal regions?
I think we'll take 2 more questions, because this was also about parallel cinema. You asked also about if different women's issues are being tackled by cinema. Can we just take 2 more questions and then we'll answer together?
Why we do not have too many women directors?
Oh, that is changing dramatically. Believe me, over the last a few years, there are women filmmakers just coming in waves after waves after waves.
Small waves, but there are. I'm part of that little wave, so I know.
I'd actually like to ask a little bit similar question, but more encompassing. We're talking about portrayal of Indian women in film. I was wondering about the evolution of Indian women in filmmaking in the film industry, and in terms of the strength that they might have gotten behind the scenes that we don't see. Like, for example, artists such as yourselves or Lata Mangeshkar, or even Madhuri Dixit, who could carry a film, and films would make or be broken or made with or without popular actresses. Does that type of strength did that translate in real life in the filmmaking industry, even though it wasn't portrayed necessarily in film? And did it reflect, the progress of Indian women, in Indian society till today, like in terms of how Indian women are much more involved in their careers?
Okay. The last question, and then we can.
Yeah, my question is very short. Why we don't see too much of parallel cinema nowadays? It used to be so interesting to see Nishant, Ankur, Mandi, all this, Mr. Shabana.
Because they're parallel and they're not mainstream.
I'd like to answer that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that there is no longer any parallel cinema. I think it's changed its face. If you look at the independent film, that is the new face of parallel cinema. Because if we look at people like Adur and Shyam Benegal and Mrinal Sen and Govind, they've all had their roots in rural India and coming out of patriarchal societies. Today's filmmakers are urban, Western educated, upper class, rich guys and women, and they are reflecting their reality. I don't have a problem with that because India is a country that lives in several centuries simultaneously. So on the one hand, you have people living in the 18th century and on the other in the 21st century, and they're all living simultaneously. So just like there is rural India, there's a real India, there is also this, this sophisticated Western upper middle class, and that's as reflective of India as the rest of it. What it is doing is, there are lots of independent films that are being made, which are not about rural India, which are either about the small town or it is about urban India. So they are not falling within the mainstream formula films. So they've only changed their face, but they continue to be parallel cinema, I think. So I don't think that they've disappeared.
Also add to that, I think as a filmmaker myself who grew up during that period of time, parallel cinema as a word or as a phrase, identifying, branding a certain kind of cinema was something I deeply resented. As if the cinema was one, the main cinema, and the other was a parallel cinema which could never really meet with the mainstream cinema. I think there's a much wider variety of cinema happening today, and that is the strength of Indian cinema. I'm really optimistic about the growth of Indian cinema over the next 5 to 10 years. Not just the technology has changed, but as Shabana pointed out, the kind of subjects that are being dealt with are also going through a major transformation, and a much wider variety of cinema is going to happen in India now.
Thank you. Do we have more time, or can somebody tell me? Yes, 2 more? Okay. Maya, where are you with the mic? Oh.
Thank you. I do have a question, but my wife is sitting next to me. And she's a strong woman, and she has a question. So,
What
is that? Thank you. I have a question about, you talked about the role of censorship. And what I see is that violence against women is condoned, but consensual relationships are not condoned by the censors. Why is that, and what can you do about it?
Even the censorship phenomena is actually changing dramatically in India today. I mean, nudity was a taboo 10 years ago. A lesbian relationship was unheard of 15, 20 years ago.
Kissing is allowed.
So yes, like the social norms, the censor board is also made up of people, you know. And as the people are changing, our society is changing, so is the censorship, the process of censorship changing too.
I think if we can understand that this use of the censor board, the word censor board is problematic because it's not a censor board. It is a board of film certification. There's a lot of difference, but the minute you say censor board, it seems like, all right, they're out there to censor. I worked in a film called Godmother, in which there's a lot of violence. And in fact, I get my lackey to shoot a person point blank with my 4-year-old son watching it. The censor said, no problem with it. But I lit a cigarette and they said, no. She can kill, but she cannot smoke a cigarette.
Yeah, it's very arbitrary.
It makes no sense. She's been raising her hand for a long time, Nandita.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. I've been a fan since 1974, watching parallel cinema, and I think it was called parallel cinema because the majority of folks did not know that it existed. And I recall lobbying for it amongst my friends that this genre of Indian cinema exists. So I thank you for having provided us with that and bringing it to the larger population. I have a completely different question to ask of you, and that is that I'm amazed as an Indian woman that Indian sort of the music and the lyrics, and which you know very well about, are so powerful and full of emotions. Yet what I find is that particularly Indian males have in their day-to-day life have a particularly difficult time expressing emotions. So it's almost as if it's sublimated through poetry. And so I would... Okay, what I'm saying is that it is amazing to me as I've watched, Indian poetry, lyrics. They are so amazing. They're full of emotions and perhaps the best literature that is available in the world. Yet in our contemporary lives, as we speak to each other, particularly Indian males, have a very difficult time expressing emotions are males.
My husband, who writes the
know,
best song in the
I
world.
I know. Yes.
Hold on before you clap.
You don't know what's coming
Has not said a single romantic word to me in 25 years of our marriage. I have to go. I have to go.
You have to go? 2 minutes we're finishing.
So I guess I rest my
She
case.
was leaving, but your husband isn't here, so it's okay. I mean, he's not hearing all of this. Okay, I think we will have to close the panel. It's past 9 o'clock. Just want to thank everybody, the great audience, and of course, great panelists.